Most fans of the Mortal Kombat games are aware that the franchise has existed through three very distinct eras over its lengthy lifespan. These are usually referred to as the Classic Era, the 3D Era, and the NRS Era. Where most games belong in the series is plain for everyone to see. MK1? That's a Classic Era game, obviously. MKX? That's an NRS era game because it was made by NetherRealm Studios, a development studio created in 2010 after Warner Bros. Bought a failing Midway Games and their intellectual properties in 2009. So far, so good. But what about the black sheep of the family, Mortal Kombat 4, and by extension, the enhanced version, Mortal Kombat Gold? It seems a lot of people I've spoken to, as well as some people on Twitter who answered this poll I posted, as well as MortalKombatWarehouse.com, which is a great resource for MK stuff if you make MK content by the way, have said it's a 3D era game. Understandable. I mean, the game is by definition a 3D fighting game. In fact, it was the very first 3D MK game. While this may seem like reason enough to classify it as a 3D era MK game at first, I believe the fact that MK4 has 3 dimensions instead of 2 isn't the determining factor when it comes to which era the game fits in. I'm here to present some facts that to me clearly place MK4 squarely in the classic era. This is why Mortal Kombat 4 isn't a 3D era game. Reason the first. It plays like a classic era game. In MK1, everyone shared the same basic normal moves. You had your low punch, high punch, low kick, and high kick. Everyone had access to a roundhouse kick by pressing back and high kick, a sweep with back and low kick, an uppercut with down and high punch, and a ducking high kick with what else? Down and kick. Not only did every single playable character in MK1 have these tools, so did every playable character in MK2, where they also added a ducking low kick and crouch punch. And MK3, as well as the two upgraded versions, Ultimate MK3 and MK Trilogy, excluding the bosses of course. Can you guess what other games shared the concept of every playable character sharing these exact moves? They're all here. Low punch, high punch, low kick, high kick, all mapped to the same buttons as previous games. The sweep, pokes and uppercuts are once again all universal and are performed the exact same way as in the previous games, though they did replace some of the awkward looking ducking high kicks with some sort of awesome kicking uppercut thingy. Now that's innovation. Some of the special moves in MK4 still retain the old inputs that changed dramatically when Deadly Alliance turned up. Take, I don't know, picking a character at random, take Sub-Zero with his slide for instance. Today it's back forward X on PlayStation, but for years before that it was back forward circle, going as far back as Deadly Alliance, which had the cold shoulder move in place of the slide. But before Deadly Alliance it was performed very differently. In MK1, MK2, MK Trilogy, and MK4, the required input was back plus low punch plus low kick plus block. Weird how the input stayed consistent for those games but changed dramatically with the arrival of Deadly Alliance. It's almost like Deadly Alliance was the beginning of a new era for the franchise. Something else that changed with Deadly Alliance was throws. In MK1 to MK4, a throw was performed by standing right next to an opponent and pressing low punch. From Deadly Alliance onwards, throws had their own dedicated button. So it's clear that the control scheme of MK4 is basically identical to the rest of the classic era games and not at all similar to the 3D era games of which people like to say it's part of. Even though MK4 is a 3D fighting game, the third dimension is implemented really poorly and is barely used compared to Deadly Alliance, Deception and Armageddon. To sidestep in those games, you simply hold up or down on the D-pad and your character will move in a circle around your opponent. This isn't the case with MK4. In this game, you have to either quickly double tap the run button to move a little bit away from the camera, or double tap the run button while pressing down to move a little bit towards the camera, and it's a bit of a pig to get to work properly first time. The only real use for this is to reach dropped weapons or stage interactables. It hardly defines the combat. As such, the combat in MK4 pretty much just feels like a 2D fighter with a janky, barely used sidestep feature slapped on. Probably the most defining gameplay mechanic of the 3D era games is different fighting styles. Each character can cycle through 2 different hand-to-hand styles, each with different normals and strings, and 1 weapon style. Though in Armageddon, characters were limited to 1 hand-to-hand and 1 weapon style each. This isn't in MK4. Sure, each character can pull a weapon out with a certain input, which was new for the franchise, but rather than giving you a whole new fighting style, this simply gave you 1 or 2 new attacks while disabling your ability to do combos, and was more of a gimmick than a bona fide core mechanic. Outside of the weird and rarely used sidestepping, being able to wield a weapon, and each character having a new bone-breaking move, the combat in MK4 is basically the same as in the other classic games. It's a hell of a lot closer to those early games than it is to Deadly Alliance, Deception and Armageddon, that's for sure. Reason the second one. Stage similarities. There's a lot of stages in the series that have been in multiple games. Usually when they're brought back in the same era, they look the same with next to no redesign, like the pit in MK9 versus the pit in MKX. When they're brought back from a different era though, they're usually radically redesigned, like the Living Forest from MK Trilogy versus the Living Forest in MK9, or Goro's Lair in MK Trilogy versus Goro's Lair in MK11. But if you look at Goro's Lair in MK4, it's clearly the MK Trilogy design just in 3D. The Living Forest and Soul Chamber in MK Gold are clearly just the same stages from MK2 and MK3 respectively, just in 3D with pretty much zero redesigning. They even have near identical music to their 2D counterparts. While the church in MK Gold doesn't look like the chapel from MK3, they share the exact same music. And the Netherrealm stage in MK Gold not only has a sped up version of the Scorpion's Lair stage music from MK Trilogy, they literally just copy-pasted the background from the 2D stage to use as the background for the 3D version. Surely if MK4 and Gold were 3D era games, they'd have redesigned these things and not recycled music from the older games. Reason 3. Game modes. The early MK games had very little in terms of modes. MK1 and MK2 simply had a single arcade ladder to fight through in single player, and a basic 2-player mode. That was it. MK3 changed things up a little by adding combat codes to the 2-player mode, allowing for various modifiers to alter the gameplay. This feature was brought back for MK4, but didn't make another appearance until MK9 in the NRS era. Ultimate MK3 and MK Trilogy both featured 2 vs 2 tag and 8-player tournament modes. MK4 dropped the tag mode but expanded slightly on the tournament mode, as well as introducing new team battle and endurance modes. Mortal Kombat didn't have a real story mode until Deadly Alliance, where they included a conquest mode that acted as a tutorial and a means of expanding the story in a way never before seen in the series. Conquest mode became a staple of the 3D era as both Deception and Armageddon included and improved upon it. Deadly Alliance also introduced the Crypt, a place to unlock items and secrets that's existed in some form or another in every MK game since. Both the Crypt and Conquest modes are defining aspects of the 3D era, and both are modes MK4 doesn't have. Deadly Alliance brought a lot to the series that simply never existed before, almost as if it was the beginning of a new era for the franchise. Reason the 4th. The Collins English Dictionary defines the word era as a point in time, especially one beginning a new or distinctive period. MK4 wasn't the start of a new or distinctive period for the franchise, it was the end of one. There were no games after MK4 that were like MK4, apart from the upgraded version of course. Deadly Alliance was definitely the beginning of a new or distinctive period, as the 2 following games were for the most part built upon the new things Deadly Alliance brought to the franchise. Deadly Alliance, Deception, and Armageddon all share a similar distinct feel in the same way that MK4 shares a similar distinct feel with the previous games. MK4 came out in 1997, only 2 years after MK3, and there was a 5-year gap between MK4 and Deadly Alliance. But people consider MK4 and Deadly Alliance to be in the same era? In the classic era, we had a run of games that all released fairly close to the release of the previous game. Then there was 5 years of nothing, apart from the upgraded version of MK4 of course. In 2002, Deadly Alliance arrived with its radically different graphics, gameplay, and modes of play on a new generation of console, and we again got a run of games that all released in a fairly consistent manner, those being Deception and Armageddon. Then once again there was a long period of time where we got no new MK games, another 5-year gap as it happens.
Coincidence? I think not!
In 2011, MK returned on a new generation of console with radically different graphics, gameplay, and modes of play. I think it makes sense to place MK4 in the era that existed around the same time, had basically the same gameplay, and shared plenty of the same staff. Oh, didn't I mention? After MK Gold, a fairly large portion of the development team left to work on other projects, including one of the co-creators of the series, John Tobias. If a long period of no new entries in the series, a huge change in basically every aspect of the game when it returned, and a sizable portion of the people involved leaving don't constitute the end of an era, I don't know what does. I think the things I've mentioned in this video that link MK4 to the classic era greatly outweigh the fact that it happened to have some janky sidestepping which seems to be the reason people think it's a 3D era game. And that's why Mortal Kombat 4 isn't a 3D era game, at least in my eyes. What do you think? I look forward to seeing what people have to say in response to this, the bravest of opinions. Leave those comments down below, consider liking the video and subscribing if you enjoyed it, maybe even share it, that would really help. And I hope you look forward to my upcoming videos where I rank the best and worst fatalities of each of the MK eras. Peace. And chicken grease.